If you've ever read the work of D.H. Lawrence, books like Lady Chatterley's Lover and Women in Love, then you've already been acquainted with his wife, Frieda. She was the inspiration for much of his controversial and sometimes banned writing. Now, a chapter of her life is coming to the stage at George Street Playhouse in New Brunswick. It's called A Moon to Dance By and stars the Tony and Emmy Award-winning Jane Alexander as Frieda Lawrence. We spoke with Jane Alexander, director Edwin Sherin, her husband, and playwright Thom Thomas as rehearsal was getting underway at the new 42nd Street Studios in Manhattan.
I love playing Frieda. She's larger than life. She's a great earth mother and at the same time a bit eccentric, and but very nurturing. And it's a joy to play her. I think Thom has written a remarkable play and a wonderful character and a great role for an actress of my age.
Her estranged son comes to visit her, and her lover, who is probably only 2 or 3 years older than her son. And it's about that interconnection. It certainly rings true today. It's about people trying to find each other, trying to seek out that and express the love that very often is hindered by the experiences they've had.
I could never be Lawrence, but no, I think it's pertinent to have the language when they talk, especially Frieda talks so frankly about sex and about her relationship, and she wants Monty to open up too. Let's talk about, well, how's your sexual relationship with your wife? You know, and he's going, what? Mom, you don't talk about things like this, you know.
In the play, Thom has put a scene between Monty Weekley, my son, played by Gareth Sachs, and me, Frieda Lawrence, up in front of the shrine. And Frieda is then able to talk a little bit about what Lawrence meant to the world and what his writing meant to the world. Today, we call D.H. Lawrence a classic writer, but we must remember that back in the 1930s, when this play takes place, 1939, just before World War II, his books were banned in many, many places. And Lady Chatterley's Lover did not reach the United States until the early 60s, you may remember. So if you put it in context, he was a volatile figure in the world of the literary world, and Frieda was his muse and his model, as she was Lady Chatterley.
I contacted the Nottingham Library, and I knew that they had some letters and some correspondence that wasn't being released by the family. And I said, well, can I get them in any way? I'm writing a play about it. And the lady on the other end said, no, I'm sorry, we can't. And I just pleaded, you know. And she said, I'll tell you what. And I heard a door close, and she said, I can read some of them to you. If I'll read slowly. And of course, I'm fumbling for my pen. So I got more insight at that moment. And nobody knows exactly what transpired between everybody. We don't know what the dialogue was between Frieda and her son. But I can imagine, I mean...
Well, you have.
I have imagined, yes. I have imagined, because we know what his frame of mind was when he got there. He had one time written a very terrible letter to his mother, and what he thought of her, etc. And that had been very hurtful to Frieda. And then we know that later, after the war, Frieda actually went back to England and spent some time with her grandchildren and with her son and daughter-in-law. So something transpired.
Shocking is interesting because I don't find Frieda shocking so much as I find her wonderfully larger than life and very, very human. And this is a play that many, many women who had to leave their husbands for one reason or another will relate to, because she left Monty's father, Ernest Weekley, an Englishman. She fell in love with D.H. Lawrence. She fell in love with his mind. She fell in love with everything about him. And they spent the next, until he was 44, 45 when he died of tuberculosis, D.H. Lawrence. Frieda and D.H. were very, very tight. So I don't know if she's shocking per se. There are many women, as I say, who will relate to her needing to leave the husband.
Although it's interesting how the controversy, when you ask the women in an audience, we had several talkbacks before, some women could not understand at all how a woman could leave her children and run off with a man. I mean, the oldest being 12 years of age. And yet other women would say, I can understand it. And the women who had objected to it would say, what do you mean? How could you? And she said, well, I can understand it. She wanted a life of her own and she felt penned in there. And, you know, so it's controversial in that way. I mean,
well, women are not permitted to be anti-heroes anyway. Women are always chastised if they behave like men.
And let's,
they don't get those prerogatives in any culture.
And to defend Frieda, let's be fair to her. She didn't feel that she was abandoning her children. She thought she was going to have them in her life, but her husband, Ernest Weekley, refused her a visitation or anything. So
yeah, he pushed her away.
He pushed her away. He essentially kidnapped the kids at one point and took them to another city. So, as I say, there's going to be a lot of people who can relate very easily to
And
Frieda.
this was still an Edwardian, Victorian mentality where
Yes.
If a woman would leave a husband and go off, well, the children would remain with the father because he's the one that could support them. And, you know, a woman, what kind of job could she ever have gotten? You know, and especially her going off the way she did. But Jane said something very important, that always in Frieda's mind was that she could go off with Lawrence, but she should share the children with her husband, Ernest.
Yeah, it wasn't abandonment in her eyes.
No, she thought she'd come back.
It was abandonment in the eyes of her son. But
Yes.
that's another issue,
Yeah.
and that's probably one of the major conflicts in the play. I don't have any problem directing my wife. Essentially, I keep out of her way. This is the, almost close to 24 plays that I've done with her. So I know her habits, I know her needs, and basically she needs to be left alone. And then every so often, you know, I tilt a little. I just push her one way, slightly, carefully. But she's an extraordinary actor, so with extraordinary actors, and by the way, the other two are similar. They don't need much directing. They need enabling. It's different.
I'd also like to say one other thing, that the play is funny. I mean, Thom has written some, the audience just loves it. They laugh so hard at this juxtaposition
That's
of
very well.
two very, very different takes on life, Monty and Frieda's.
Yeah.
Causes a lot of laughter. The play stands on its own, and it's got a wonderful universal theme, which is sons, mothers, and lovers, I guess you would say. And everybody can relate to that.